Hello, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Just wanted to tell you all thanks for coming and taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. I know calving season and bull sales and all that's happening around the clock now, so I appreciate you guys coming and taking the time out of your schedule. Raylene Honeycutt with Montana Stock Growers is going to introduce her crew here and give us the outline for the evening.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon. As Barry mentioned, I'm Raylene Honeycutt, the Executive Vice President of Montana Stock Growers Association. In addition, I have two other staff members joining me today, Ellie Brighton in the back. She'll be taking notes of all of the great ideas and thoughts that you share with us today. And then we also have Ian Kane. You met him walking in at the registration. Ian will be floating around as well, and will be helping pass the mic during our open mic session. Additionally, I wanted to introduce our board members that are here with us today, and John Grandy, our president, is here, and he was going to, you were going to introduce our board members today. So I'll introduce John and hand it over to him.
Yeah, it sounds like that's pretty much all done, but fortunately for you and me both, I get to sit here and listen and take notes tonight and let Rayleigh and Turk run everything. But I'll just echo what Barry said. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank Barry and all his crew for having us here and for putting on the food, and we really appreciate that as we get around. So yeah, tonight's program is going to be run by Rayleigh. She introduced the staff, and also by our second vice president, Turk Stovall. We also have our director from this area, John Hagenbarth, is with us here this evening. And that's all I need to say, other than I'll just kick it back to Rayleigh and Turk and just thank you all very much. And we got a few things we're going to do first, but when we get to the point where we have kind of public comment, that's why we're here. So please don't be bashful. We want to hear anything you've all got to say. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. In addition to our board, I wanted to recognize Kristen Parman, who is with Livestock Marketing Association, as well as Les Graham with the Montana Auction Markets as well. They have been huge supporters and sponsors of us getting these listening sessions off the ground and traveling around the state. So please help me in thanking them as well. Every listening session is a little different. At this time, we do like to recognize any of our congressional delegation representatives, elected officials, candidates. I'm not sure if we have any in the audience. If you are here, raise your hand. I don't think we have any tonight, so that is great. It's great. We've had actually representatives from some of our congressional districts attending other listening sessions and their staff taking notes. So it's really exciting to see those folks taking an interest in this. So I'm going to hand it over to Turk, and we're really going to kick it off with just kind of setting the stage of what is producer profitability, where we've been, where we're going, and then we'll dive into the meat and bones of the event. So with that, Turk, I'll hand it over to you.
Just a little housekeeping. Did everyone get a handout or a chance to get a handout? If not, we'll have Ian start passing these around. And do we have some that need the handouts? Okay. He'll bring them in, and we're gonna we're gonna go through kind of a format that we've been working through that seems to be pretty effective, but. Like Rayleigh and John said tonight, I mean, really this meeting is about hearing from real farmers and ranchers on what we feel are really critical topics that we need to get some answers to, some solutions to, and how can we be the most effective representing the Montana livestock industry to really what it comes down to is how do we get this next generation interested in it, taking over these ranches, and not only do they want to, but is it a sustainable career for them? And so just be thinking about that as we go through tonight. You know, this idea came through actually myself, and Race was there, and some other Montana Stock Growers board members on some meetings that was actually held by LMA. And there was a working group that Joe Goggins put together with area cattlemen in this region to really ask the question is, how can we all really work together? And how can we all set differences aside and get down to some topics that really will make a big difference for the benefit of our industry, for the long term of our industry, and probably the most important part is how do we keep this next generation wanting to ranch and wanting to farm? And we said, hey, there are some topics out there that it seems like we just can't get on the same page in. Country of origin labeling, the beef checkoff, markets, feeder cattle markets, or the fat cattle market. We're going to say, hey, you know what, we just, for some reason, just can't get on the same page here. Can we just set those topics aside? And we're just not going to bring those up right now. And let's just talk about some topics that we think, you know, we hear everybody talking about all the time. And what are we going to do about it? And so that is a little bit of the framework that we ask of everybody tonight. Of those topics, that is not what tonight's about. It's not rehashing country origin labeling, the beef checkoff, or the marketplace. Tonight is about some topics that we are trying to get to that really can make a difference to get the next generation interested, as well as, hey, if they want to operate, how can we get them up and going? When we talk about the next generation, we all think about, hey, somebody younger wanting to get into the business. Well, there was, I don't know how factual it is, but the number that I was hearing, you know, the average age of a new rancher or farmer coming into the business is 47 years old. And I used to say that used to be how old I am, but now I'm 48. But
It's his birthday today.
it is my birthday today, but yeah. I made it one more year, Ryan, so, but anyway, what does it take for someone that says, you know what, I've never been involved, my parents or my family doesn't farm or ranch, and I just, you know what, one day I woke up and I want to be a farmer rancher. Is that even possible? I mean, do they even have a shot at it? You know, it seems like more times than not that, hey, you know, the operation just can't take the next generation on right now because maybe it's financial, or maybe mom or dad, and we'll blame it on dad, just not willing to give up the reins yet. So you either go off to college, you go to the military, or you go work for someone else, or you're gone for a while. And then something happens that either, hey, we really want to have you back, and you know, that ranch tries to figure out how to accommodate that next generation on there. But that scenario is probably not the majority of the situation. And there are a lot of producers out there that either maybe they had a tough time and they want to get back in the business, and how can we get them back in the business? So with that said, there's a lot of different topics that we can talk about tonight. And we just said we're going to start with 5 topics and at least get the conversation going. And that's one of your sheets that you have handed out of the 5 points. And we said, hey, if we were just going to have a start here, let's talk about these 5 points. That doesn't mean that's the only ones, but we need to start somewhere. And we're going to go through some processes tonight that really are interactive, and we're going to ask you to talk, because this is a listening session to listen to real producers across our state. We're holding the same session across 12 different sale barns across our state, with the hopes that we are going to give the chance for our producers to be able to have a voice, give their opinion, and it's recorded. And so that's another thing. Just so you know, this is being streamed, so others that couldn't have made the meeting can listen in as well. We're also recording it so we can keep all of the notes, and we're also being interactive. So Ray Lee and their staff, they have a, God, I always call it a doodle poll, but I don't know what it's called, but it's called Menti.
A survey, yeah.
It's a survey. But we're going to go through a series of questions. We're going to ask you guys to take out your phones here, and we're going to interact on just some topics. But the topics we're going to cover tonight are government programs. Um, where do these government programs fit in the livestock industry? What programs are already here, and are they working? Like LRP, are you using it? Does it work good for you? Um, how can we improve it? Labor, we talk about labor all the time. What can we do to help create a solution to our farms and ranches and relative to labor? The other one is we would talk about the barriers to entry for a young or a new producer coming into this business. What is the number one things they need? And, you know, and I'm just regurgitating a lot of conversations, but it's usually comes down, they need access to land and they need access to capital. Now, I'm saying the list is long, but our whole point is to give you ideas to talk about as well. The one thing that really got talked about at our last meeting was mentorship, where mentorship, we believe, could be a really big solution moving forward, where we have ranches that maybe they had kids that just, maybe they don't want to come back and ranch, or maybe they didn't have any kids at all. And if they wanted to say, you know what, I really want to help the next generation or a new producer get up and going, what does that look like? And how can we facilitate that? You know, the other topic that I'm last but not least, and arguably maybe the most important because it's the most time sensitive, is our tax climate. You know, taxes obviously affect us all. We've talked about accelerated depreciation. That's expiring. And probably the elephant in the room that affects us all and affects all businesses is the estate tax. If we just said, hey, you know what, let's make the estate tax our number one issue. You know, I'll just use Joe Goggins' terminology here because I think it's a good one. He goes, we have ag organizations that represent us across the agricultural community. We have Farm Bureau, we have Farmers Union, we have RCAF, we have Montana Cattlemen, we have U.S. Cattlemen's Association. How can we say, hey, you know what, just for a minute, can we just work together at least on one topic? And if we can cross that bridge and create some unity, then can there be two topics? But is that number one topic, what should it be? And that is part of this listening session. Because one thing about it, as Joe would say, maybe we can't all agree on whatever our number one topic is, but could we agree on our number two topic and get something done in Washington, D.C.? So just to share of what has happened just in our meetings at Pays, at Three Forks, we have had Bill Bullard with RCAF at our meetings. We had Jess Peterson with U.S. Cattlemen's. And we've had others with other organizations. And we've asked them, we have an open mic to talk. And just so you know, we have always, every meeting has respected our rules and saying, hey, we have some hot topics here we're just not going to talk about. You know, Bill Bullard said, hey, you know what? We have some number one topics that just aren't part of this, what this meeting's been talking about. But he was respectful and said, hey, you know what? I'm not going to talk about it because you asked me not to talk about it. You know, it was asked about how can we unify about things? And Bill would say, well, we got to agree on things we can unify on. But it's been a very, very, very productive meeting series. Jess Peterson would come down and talk about U.S. Cattlemen's. Yeah, these are big, important topics that we're bringing up. He goes, but they have some other number ones as well. But can we come together? I think we have started it. We have started those conversations, and we really look forward to tonight to get some more input from you guys to really move this, really a movement forward. And just talking with Kristen, there's other states that are watching what we're doing here in Montana. You know, Montana is very much on the map. And it started from these working groups, and then board members that were part of that working group came together and said, hey, how can we make a resolution to be proposed at the Montana State, or at Montana Stock Growers State Convention in December? Those resolutions were proposed last December. They were debated, they were discussed, and they were voted on. And there was resolutions that were passed to talk about how do we work and create a favorable environment for multi-generational farms and ranches. How do we keep this sustainable and going? And there was a directive saying we need to create some unity. And we need to make this our number one topic. And that is why John, myself, Rayleigh, and the staff are here, is because our membership voted and says this is your number one topic. And so that is why we're here. John always makes up a good point. You know what? We are here not just for Stockholders members. We are here to try to create some unity in Montana and across this country. So as we get our feedback, we will bring this to our mid-year convention, reorganize, and then we're going to take the topics that our farmers and ranchers have gave their voice on, and we're going to go to the next level of this to have the number one topics. So with that said, Rayleigh.
Well, thank you, Turk. Now we are at the portion of the meeting that is the participation portion. So before we get started, I need everyone to grab their cell phones. Does everybody have a cell phone? I'm sure you all do. All right. Pull those cell phones out, and you will see on the front page of the packet that you received, and there's 2 QR codes, so make sure you're on the front page. It says minty.com. You can either type in the website or scan the QR code, and that will take you to an online platform where you enter the 6-digit code, which is highlighted in yellow, and then you will be prompted to just kind of hang out there for a second while everybody gets started, and then we're going to do some survey questions for the audience.
So this is where we're going to make you feel uncomfortable. But if you can't figure that phone out, Ian will come up and figure it out for you. Okay, and it's slow sometimes. And so just give it time. If you're behind or anything, please just say, hey, just give me a minute here, because we want everybody's answers.
Yes, so feel free to raise your hand. We'll run up. Again, if you're not familiar with the QR, you should just be able to open your camera up and scan that code, and then it will take you to a website. And then the code is 4972-2564.
Just to be redundant here, I know we've had some folks come in. Does everybody have a pamphlet sheet? If not, just raise your hand and Ian can bring you one. So this has been a, okay.
One, two. 1, 2. Oh, perfect. Oh, yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, so our first question is, when you think about producer profitability, what 3 words come to mind? So you can go ahead and type those into your cell phone, and it will pop up on the screen. For those of you who may not be familiar with word clouds, the more of the same answer we get, the bigger the word gets. So that kind of tells you the multiple answers that we're getting from some of the same words.
Sustainable is a common word that we've seen on some of the last meetings.
Margins is a new one. We're also seeing capital, risk, future, markets. All right, we'll give you about 10 more seconds to get your answers submitted. Okay. The final countdown. Well, there's some answers coming in. People were hitting the send button.
Now I'm just going to keep asking. Does anybody need help with their phone or anything? Just don't be bashful, seriously.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are going to move on to the second question that we have for you. And that is, in 20 words or less, share with us the biggest challenges you face in your operations regarding growth and success. And you may have to submit one, and then you can submit more words. We're seeing a lot on success planning and business transactions. That tends to be a theme that we've seen at the last 2 meetings as well.
I don't see interest on there yet.
There are some bankers in the room. We better
Oh. Can everybody read the screen okay? If not, we can read it as well.
And one thing we'll do is after this meeting, you'll get a follow-up email from us highlighting some of the key areas that we talked about. And we do share some of these fun word clouds as part of that email as well, so you can take a deeper dive and look at it. All right, about 10 more seconds, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Get that sent in. All right, moving on to the next question. In the last 10 years, what tools or programs have been the most beneficial to your operations profitability? We've seen a lot of, federal programs, some state programs, labor programs, kind of to get your ideas flowing. I see a few more people still typing, so we'll hang tight for a few more seconds.
We're waiting for Megan over here, but she's getting there.
Ian, can you help her? No, just kidding.
H2A has been a big topic. Sometimes it's a big topic of frustration. You hear a lot, how come it takes me so long to get these guys from Mexico, and maybe I should just go down to the border and I could get them a lot faster. So that's been a big aggravation to a lot of operations.
All right, it looks like most answers have been submitted. So we will move on. All right, and what do you believe will be the biggest challenge the livestock industry will face in the next 20 years? Love to see all these answers coming in. It's interesting, no matter where we are in the state, we are definitely starting to see some themes, and we'll look later down the road after we get done with all of the listening sessions to kind of analyze this data and collate it together to see what those big themes are. But I think we're seeing some of those right now that really align with some of the 5 that we'll be talking about early or later tonight. Some of the bigger themes we're seeing here for those of you online, land, labor, regulations, interest rates, price, sustainability, real estate, imports. All right, I'll give you guys about 7 more seconds this time. All right, so we're going to wrap this up. We have a few more questions that we'll be doing with you after. Oh, we have one more, and then we'll head to the open mic section. So the last question we have in this section is regarding succession planning. Share with us which category you most relate to. I am a young producer who is entering into the business or transitioning into an operation. I do not have a succession plan. I am in the process of finalizing a succession plan. I have a succession plan. I plan to exit the industry, or this is not applicable to me. Happy to see so far we don't have anybody planning to exit the industry. In our other meetings, we've had a few folks selecting that. All right, it looks like answers are in. All right, so we're going to take a pause there. We have a few more questions after we do our open mic section. But with that, I'll kind of hand it over to Turk, and we can open up each of the sections. And this is the part where we want to hear from you. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
You know, I always enjoy seeing these out just come unfold in front of our eyes, and just you get other people's thoughts, and I enjoy the fact that as the words get bigger, obviously that's just emphasizing there was more answers that were coming in the same. And it seems like we are starting to get aligned on, hey, there's some major topics here that we need to really talk about. And we're getting ready to go through our 5 points. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask to hear from you to talk about that. And we're going to start with taxes, and we're going to ask you to come down and just talk about what do taxes mean to you? And what are some things maybe we're not thinking about, or what should we emphasize, or you need to make sure that, hey, we need to know that's a very important topic. And we're going to go through each one of these, and then after that, then we'll go through just an open mic. And so if there are other topics that you want to bring up to talk about, we'll talk about that time. So with that said, let's talk about taxes. The two that I brought up earlier was the estate tax and accelerated depreciation. John, what is it? We have, right now we have some tax benefits in the code that are going to be expiring. And maybe just talk about that a little bit and what that can mean.
Well, for anyone that's not aware, yeah, the current tax law on death tax, we have an exemption. Obviously, we don't like the death tax. We've been trying for decades to get rid of it. The right thing is to get rid of it altogether. But as of now, at least, there's an exemption that's north of 13 million for an individual, which makes it 26 million for a married couple, and that's indexed for inflation, so it keeps going up. So again, we want to get rid of the whole thing, but at 26 million, that covers a lot of ranches. There's a lot of ranches that doesn't cover. As it stands right now, that rule expires on January 1st, 2026. Now, generally, we can, if you need to just stay the course, that's a good thing in this environment because Congress can't get anything done, so staying the course and changing nothing is what they're good at. But in this case, we can't count on that. We need them to act and to extend, either get rid of that death tax or extend those exemptions, as well as the stepped-up basis that goes along with that. This needs to be done. If nothing happens in 2026, we'll revert back to a $5 million exemption. And of course, there is some movement in Congress. There are some people that would like to act and go the other way, make it a $2 or $3 million exemption instead of staying where we are. So that's the really, I guess, critical aspect of the estate tax. And just a little background on that, how that all works, of course. So there are bills introduced in Congress right now in both the Senate and the House to extend those exemptions and everything. Those bills will go, they're a placeholder. They will go absolutely nowhere in an election year, but they're at least there. They're a placeholder. They get people talking about it. We need to really get to work on this. Start people thinking this year, but really next year is when the action's going to be, because if we know Congress, they'll probably get excited about it in about November of 2025.
All right, so we would love to hear from you guys. Obviously, estate tax is top of mind for many folks, but there's other components to the tax structure that I know lots of people are having, thoughts on, concerns, struggles. So at this time, if anyone has anything to say, we would love to pass you the mic. The one thing that we do ask is that you identify yourself, say your name, so that our note taker can document that, as well as those online know who is speaking. The first one to go is always the shy one. All right. And we'll just hand mics instead of as much as possible, since the steps are kind of crowded.
Hi, I'm Brian Massard from Dillon, Montana, and we've thought about the tax implications just in Montana, not federally. I mean, we've been talking about the death tax for 40 years, as long as I've been growing up, and it's been a challenge, and we have to fight for it every time. I've been watching the landscape of ranches in Dillon, Montana for 40 years disappear, and this is one area that I think we can change in the state of Montana. I haven't found a senator or a legislature in the last 8 years that would carry a bill like this, but to require, if you want the egg tax exemption, I know that Beaverhead County Commissioners recognize this. They call it prove up. And that means you've got to be running, I think we ought to put together some kind of tax legislation in the state of Montana that if you're going to buy a ranch and you're going to come to Montana after watching Yellowstone and put on your cowboy hat, you better run 80% of that ranch's historical production if you want that tax exemption. And I think that's really important, and that would kind of hold, I know the real estate guys, poor Chance Bernal up there is not going to like that. Anybody selling real estate's not going to like that, but I have heard in every conversation with every ranch in the last 20 years, I can't afford to buy my neighbor's ranch. If you have any debt, you can't buy it. Even if you're 6 generations, you can't hardly afford to buy your neighbor's place today because somebody can come in and buy it and sell hunts or sell the cows, and the hired men go away, the cows go away, the small communities dry up, and if they had to run it as a ranch and keep Montana participate in this state, they ought to be running it like a ranch. And I don't know if we can, how that works, but I think something like that, they have got to, I've heard, I think Fred Wacker was saying they got to turn in a Schedule F. I think you could run 2 horses and turn in a Schedule F, so I'm not sure how much water that would hold. But if we could come up with a number in the state, if you want that ag exemption, you got to run 70 or 80% of the historical production of that. That levels the playing field a little bit more.
Thanks, Brian. And just to follow up on that, I think we're getting some momentum on that. So the governor has put together a work group through the Department of Revenue that's actively meeting every month to discuss that exact topic on if Class C tax for agricultural production should stay the same. Are there new definitions? Should there be a new classification for recreational land? So if you have additional ideas, we'd love to hear on that, because I think we will see a bill this next legislative session. Other comments?
J.M. Peck from Melrose, Montana. I guess just to key on that tax issue, surrounding property taxes, I think another issue, and we see it especially here in Beaverhead County, is the federal government's coming in and buying property, buying some of these ranches that are coming up for sale, which is decreasing our tax base, which is hurting our rural communities, and that also ties into pressing our federal government to make PILT payments and some of the payments that tie into like the Red Rock Wildlife Refuge. It's been big news in Beaverhead County that the Lima School may be shutting down. So I think that property tax that's a huge issue that has multiple facets, and talking about the importance of, like Brian said, the prove up, and how do we manage different classifications? Should we have a new classification for property for folks who buy these ranches and aren't engaged in production agriculture? And how do the details of that work? I know there was a bill brought last legislative session that didn't make it, but I think that's going to be a big push in in 2025 in our Montana legislative session. And I think like you guys are saying, like Turk was saying, that's something I think producers, we need to agree on and come together and coalesce to support some type of legislation, because in the long term that's going to be our best interest, even if the burden is on us to prove that we're in production agriculture.
How do other states handle some of this? Is there, Ryan Hughes, Dillon, but do other states, I did, Ryan Hughes, Dillon, Montana. Might have the mic, I should tell some stories on Turk. But as we go, how do other states handle some of these? Is there different codes in different states, and how do they handle it? Have we looked at that? And looking outside of agriculture industries, are there large corporations or businesses that may have a handle or an idea? So we're not always trying to reinvent the wheel, but we're looking at like different ways some of these bigger companies may be handling this, and we can tailor some of that into legislation or laws.
So I think that's what that group's doing right now. I do know that there are other states that every state's tax structure is so unique to their state. So it's hard to kind of say, let's pick this from this state. There are states that have adopted a recreational tax classification. But there's also, conversations, and I would say that our governor said that he's not interested in this conversation. But, you know, a lot of those states also have a sales tax, which we don't. So it's like how many legs on the stool and how do those legs all balance out. So it'll be really interesting as that working group comes together to kind of see what recommendations they bring forward.
Just to add, Ryan, you bring up a good point. So part of our directive is to, you know, reach and try to build a coalition. And so Raylene and her team have really worked with our surrounding state stock growers associations. And I think we're going to probably gather a lot of information of what's been happening in other states, to your point as well.
Ed Malisich here in Dillon. Kind of along the same lines, so these wealthy out-of-staters can come in, they can buy a piece of property, and they can they can put a conservation easement on it, and receive quite a little bit of money on the conservation easement, and they have the ability to write that pretty much entirely off, so they don't pay any tax on the money they receive, basically, for that conservation easement. Now, I looked into it. If I put our place in a conservation easement, we would end up paying about 40% of that money. We'd end up paying in taxes. So I don't know how you justify that, or even the playing field on that, but they have a huge advantage in that way.
Thank you, Ed.
Any others? What about federal? I mean, we've kind of hit on a state tax, but
Jim Hagenbarth from Dillon. Those of us have been in families for a long, long time, and our fathers or grandfathers paid $20 for a piece of ground. It's now worth 10,000. The state tax, federal state tax, is huge. There's, you know, you can do a lot of things with it. You can gift, but when you gift, the basis stays the same. So the easiest way to get out of it is to die and do a probate, and then the stepped up basis. You got to understand, if you sell that ground to pay estate taxes, then you have to pay capital gains on that money that you use to pay the estate tax. So you really have to look forward. In the attorneys that you're working with, a lot of them don't deal with land. They work with money, and land and money are quite different. So they get you to, you know, you can use trusts. You can use irrevocable trusts. A lot of times, if you have a trustee that's in a bank that understands a lot about money but not a lot about land, it make it very difficult for people to get along. So estate planning is huge. Getting the right team together is huge. And it's something you have to do, especially if you have an outfit that's been around for a long time, because the capital gains on the ground you have and the basis is huge, and it'll destroy you. So you got to get to work, but it's not easy, and it costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of thought, and takes a good team with your accountant and a tax lawyer and an inheritance person. It's a big job, so you better get to work.
all right, last call on tax before we move on. All right, let's move on to our government program section. And Turk, if you want to kind of hit on, you know, one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit is LRP. And for those of you who aren't too familiar with LRP, there is a page within your packet to kind of give you a little deep dive, but I'm sure many of you are very familiar with it. But Turk, I'll hand it over to you, and then we'll open it up for some comments there.
Sure. So in our resolution, it was specifically discussed about for us to look at the LRP tool. And if you're not familiar with LRP, like Rayleigh said, there's a description in the handout, but it is and can be a very effective tool. And it can be a very effective tool for a cow-calf operation because you actually can put an LRP on calves that aren't even born yet. And might not be a bad idea at record high cattle prices. Not for everybody, but one of the reasons we were talking about it is there's some thought of there's some things that we could improve. So one area of improvement is right now, in order to utilize an LRP, is you have to have physical possession of the cattle. So for like us that have feed yards and we buy cattle on a video, we would not be able to lay those cattle off the day that we buy the cattle, which in today's environment, and it always has been important, is very important. And so can we have another look at that? Is the subsidy into LRP high enough to where it's attractive to a beginning operator? Something to think about and talk about. The other thing that in our resolution that was brought up was CRP. And how can we look at this CRP to be even a further asset to a cattle operation in distress? You know, can we get these cattle out onto the CRP at an earlier time in the year when that forage is at a higher quality? And can that be an option? Some of the other programs that have been discussed is the FSA programs for beginning farmers and ranchers. So if you are a beginning farmer or rancher, there is a program with FSA that you can get loans. There's grants. But are they significant enough in today's environment? You know, is it meaningful enough that you can go out and put some land together and also put some cattle together? You know, it's a lot of money. And I'm not telling you guys something you don't already know well. And those are areas that, you know, membership has says, hey, we want you to take a look at that. But are there other areas that we need to be thinking about? Are there other programs maybe I just didn't mention that are a benefit to you that need to be looked at or changed or some way improved? And you know, there was a discussion even in the debates with our resolutions at the meetings is, hey, we just don't want the government in the livestock industry at all. And you know, some would say absolutely never. Others would say, hey, it's already in the market. You know, we already have subsidized programs. We have pasture rain programs. We have federal crop. You know, the big thing is for as livestock producers, we should be at the table to talk about it and at least say, hey, we think this would help us. It was interesting when we were at our working group, when we talked about government programs, everyone was like, oh, heck no, no way. And I don't remember what guy got up and says, all right, who in here did not cash their COVID check? And I don't know if anybody admitted that they did not cash their COVID check. Do you remember? No. And anyway, there were some other probably interesting comments after that, but we'll save that for later. But so anyway, it's just up for discussion, and we sure would like some feedback and people's thoughts there. And keep in mind, I mean, the whole context of this is whatever programs are out there, are they working for you? And if we need to change them, you need to say something. And if there's other programs out there that we don't have and need to be considered, you need to say something. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that, and sure welcome anybody in their comments.
Dan Johnson, Dell, Montana. I am a livestock risk protection insurance agent and a commodity futures broker, so I wanted to give some opinions. There's some notes in the back, just a couple things I wanted to hit on. The big talk in LRP lately has been subsidy harvest. I think that's a very important conversation. I probably would have to lean to the side that it's probably not right for people to be harvesting subsidies based off these programs, but I would also argue it's much harder than it sounds. Even in the one sentence write-up, the way LRP settles to the CME feeder cattle index, which is the same way a put or futures options or futures settle to, it's much more difficult than you think to get your LRP to settle on the same day as that futures contract. Anyways, if you have more questions about that, we can talk about it. One thing I'd say about LRP is a lot of people who raise sheep probably really miss the LRP that was for sheep. Last I knew, they were having discussions about that again, so I would definitely get comments to me or someone at USDA if you're interested in that. I don't think it's going to be under the LRP umbrella. It's more of USDA livestock insurance umbrella. But get your opinions out there if you want that program. One other program I was going to throw out there is if you retain cattle, fat cattle, I would definitely look at livestock gross margin. Very useful program. But overall, I just wanted to say I'm here to answer any questions if you had any. I know Kevin sells it as well. I'm not sure if anyone else here does, but.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Morgan Kuntz, Dillon, Montana. I guess, an interesting topic about some of the government and subsidies and government programs within our industry. I recently took a job within the dairy industry, so I work heavily within that, and we all know that, that's an industry that's really heavily receives government help. And in discussing with some people I work with, an interesting comment that they brought up is operations under 200 head in the dairy industry are pretty much kept afloat with government help. And the other side of that scale is operations 10,000 and above have economy of scale, and they're able to float it out. So it's impacted their industry greatly with consolidation from a 200 head to 10,000 head area within the dairy. And that instantly got me thinking that, our small producers don't have that. If they are a smaller producer, the government is not floating us, and so that's a big downfall within our industry. But the flip side of that is that really the answer, that the small producers are completely being floated by the government and the large ones have economy of scale. So I just think that when it comes to government involvement in our industry, I think it's really intuitive and smart for us to look over the fence into the pros and cons that have happened with other industries and just really take note of that.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Anyone else?
All right, well, we can loop back to this if you guys have any more thoughts moving on, but this kind of piggybacks into our next topic, which is barriers to entry for young producers. And I see a lot of young producers in the audience. Up on the screen, I think 19 or so of you identified as transitioning into an operation. So obviously government programs have some young farmer, rancher programs, and there are some challenges and some benefits to those. But also from a young producer standpoint, what are other areas in which you're running into, barriers, red tape, things like that? We would really like to hear from you so that we can start looking at solutions in that space.
Tony Johnson, Dell. I mean, we could beat the dead horse here and say land is really, really hard to find, even for established producers. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is the operations that run on forest allotments. The cattle that run on a forest allotment have to be in the name of the landowner that the allotment's attached to, especially when it comes to
estate planning and stuff, it adds another wheel in the cog of complication of getting a estate plan in place, because I think the children of a landowner can run 50% of the cattle on the allotment. They can't run 100 for sure, but it takes out grandchildren, nieces and nephews. So how are these young producers supposed to step into a place that runs on an allotment, own cattle, start getting those cattle paid off, and then eventually get the land paid off? So I think, you know, it's only a small number of ranches that use forest allotments, but I think that'd be a huge help in getting young producers started. Also, if there was a way just to make it easier to get into this government ground, you know, it's these government AUMs are a lot easier to make pencil than even private leases or buying land or anything like that.
Tony, such
Hey,
a
thank you. That
great
was good.
topic for a state that grazes on a lot of public land. All right, you guys, I'm looking at you. Any thoughts?
Wes Miner, Snowline Grazing Association, Lima and Monida. I don't know what the answer is, but the Forest Service is awful hard to deal with compared to the BLM. And they're both government agencies, but just whatever their protocol is, I mean, that's something for Washington to figure out, but we've been at Snowline for 20 years, and just the amount of book work and stuff that you have to go through is incremental from what it was. I mean, you can't do your job with a saddle horse anymore. It takes more than that, but I don't know, whatever, you know, kind of what Tony was talking about, why the Forest Service has to be so hard to deal with. And they, especially around here, they can't retain any staff. I don't know if it's the office or if this is just a good stepping stone for them to move up, but the turnover that we have to deal with, and we have a big forest permit. We can run almost 800 pair on the forest for 5 months. So that's a huge part of our deal. If something was to jeopardize that, it'd jeopardize the whole outfit. But that's not really a point, it's just a comment.
You know, just to get some, I guess, reaction or feedback, Ian Glennie came up, was it at Pays, and you know, he just made some comments as a young producer. He kind of felt like he gave an example that he felt like it was easier for him to go get financing to go out and start a farming operation than go out and starting a livestock operation. And you know, does anybody have any of those experiences or thoughts on that? Yeah, I mean, he just made it, he kind of felt like there was some government support programs relative to if he was going to go out there and put a crop in, there were some government programs that gave him an edge, if you will, relative if he was going to go out and you know, start a grain farming operation versus someone giving him and financing him to go out and buy some bred heifers and lease some land was the...
Yeah, and I think the other challenge that he brought up was that the limit on the loans right now are so low that he could either buy cattle or get land access, and he couldn't pencil out getting both through those programs. So the need to like increase those limits was also a really important thing, or to have two programs, one for livestock, one for land.
John Hagenbarth out in Glen. Just to tie into Tony's thoughts on the Forest Service deal, I would go almost as far as to say maybe allow the transfer of these forest permits a little easier. Say, for instance, an absentee guy buys the ranch but doesn't want the forest permit. That gets weird, and it might be a way that a young guy could get into a permit to get started. So that was a great thought that you had, but I just wanted to put that in the notes too. One other thing a neighbor of mine in Glen that couldn't make it today was talking about is several different types of funds, but just say, for instance, NRCS funds for putting in a water project or something. He was having a hard time with access to those funds as a smaller producer. It seemed like the big projects got the funding because they were easier and it had a lot less, to get funds used up without all the legwork within the bureaucracies. But he felt it was really diminishing the chance for smaller folks to get some of that money to help on their smaller projects.
So just to touch on what John said about that, so Jody and I have a place of our own too, and we've been able to have a temporary use permit on the Forest Service for the last few years on a permit that hasn't been used for 25 or 30 years. And so the egg-friendly range cons at the Forest Service, the ones that are there, would like that to get put back into production because I think, that's, I don't know, motto is not the right word, but that's what they want to see happen. And it's been a real hassle and hard to do, and it's a decent little permit. The water's terrible, it needs a lot of work, and the Forest Service understands that we're not willing to spend any money on developing these springs on a temporary use permit if we're not gonna get it. But I don't know what it takes. And just another thing, the Middle Fork of Little Sheep Creek was taken out of the Forest Service production 30 years ago, and it'd become a real fire hazard, and it wasn't accomplishing anything. The feed was so overgrown that the elk won't even go in there. And so the Forest Service approached us at Snowline several years ago, and they said, what if we just dumped 1,000 head in there for 2 days and just ate that and knocked it down? We said, yeah, we could do that. We'd be willing to do it. But however that permit had gotten taken out of use, it would have taken an act of Congress to allow that to accomplish basically their goals that they're wanting to accomplish. So I don't know. It seems like the Forest Service should be, well, like Tony was saying, easier for these younger guys that are trying to stay in it, because you can't run cattle any cheaper than that. And ranchers are the only ones that pay to use that. You got all the hikers and the hunters and everything else, but we're the only one paying to be there.
Any other comments just on the barriers to entry? It'd be nice to hear from a young producer. We can twist their arm.
I had a son that came back. He says, "Dad, I'm not going to work my ass off for you and I'm my uncle, but I will work my ass off for my family. So if you don't sell the cows, I'm out of here." Sell him the cows, which was great because that's where all the work is. But these federal leases are really, really important because the cost of land is so high right now. And we need to change some policy. The surcharge on BLM in Montana is 9 something plus 135. In Idaho, it's 5 something plus 135. The Forest Service base property now in the Forest Service is 40 acres. You got to have a working facility on that. That holds a lease that we have. What's important on federal land is that it's grazing land. And if you don't graze the grazing land with livestock managed by ranchers, who are the only ones that can do it, that grazing resource will be lost because it'll go into encroachment, either conifers or weeds and brush. And I think it's important to bring up that the word conservation has been bastardized. No one knows, except for us, what it means. And Adolf Leopold knew what it meant, but everyone has forgot about what he said. He says, and he's one of the great conservationists that has ever lived. Conservation is a positive exercise of skill and insight, not merely a negative exercise of abstinence or caution. So what we have now is a recreational playground on our Forest Service and our BLM. All the folks that come out here don't understand who we are and what our responsibilities are. And those of us that have worked with the land understand we're part of nature. And we should also understand, and we have a huge responsibility to nature to work with all the other inputs, even the little teeny guys under the soil. It's a huge responsibility to nature to do our job. And we can't do that job unless we use our livestock. And that's huge. We also have a responsibility to society because they've allowed us to have huge pieces of ground and leases and stuff where that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. And so we have a responsibility first to nature and then to society. So what we have to do is tell our story and try to get the general public to understand that if they lose the livestock, and they don't like livestock, and they lose the rancher, they're going to lose the resource. And so that's the story I'm trying to tell. Don't get very many people to listen, but it's true. And the resource that we love and we work with is going to disappear if they lose the rancher. One of the issues, you talked about subsidy. I don't have a problem with subsidy at all. I graze one hell of a lot of wildlife, and we provide one hell of a lot of recreation for nothing. And but if society will recognize that, and it's damn hard to make a cow-calf outfit work unless you aren't carrying any debt and you don't have any public land leases. And these public land leases, I did a study with the University of Wyoming and Public Land Council. It's unbelievable how much they really cost you. And if you base it on a 1,000-pound AUM, we had costs up to $36 a month. And you got to push the pencil to understand that. But ecosystem services, if we can get society to understand the service that we're doing for society is worth one hell of a lot of money because they can't do it and no one else can. So if we can convince them to help us with ecosystem services by managing their ground for them, that would be a source of income that could allow us to continue going on. So this is a big issue, and no one understands who we are or what we do. And it's important that we get that story out.
We watch you online.
So we're looking at the Forest Service government, and that all comes down to representation, and there's some people we can work with and people we can't on those levels. But what about, so these people are coming in and buying places. Are we doing anything educational with realtors? because these people are coming in and buying places. They've got to have somebody that they're trusting to a point that I want to buy a ranch in Montana, or I want to own cattle, or I don't want to own cattle, or I'm worried about the fish, or I'm worried about the wildlife. Is there a way to bridge the gap between those influencers for those people? So when they do buy a ranch in Montana, what would be great would be set up like Snowline is, where they lease the ranch out to multiple ranchers, and some of them, X amount, have to be, youth or young producers that are coming in. But is there a way to find those people? Are we reaching out to the right people to influence the ones that are buying the property to tell that story correctly? Or can we?
Are there any realtors in the audience?
Or should I go back and get a beer? It's just a thought. We spend a lot of time, like he was saying, we spend a lot of time looking inward at what we can do and how we can do it, and so on and so forth. But we were the most powerful industry, and still are one of the most powerful industries in the state of Montana. But we're losing battles outside of our own group. And then the other part on subsidies, I think subsidies are great. I think they're needed. I think we need to look at them heavier, but I also think that there has to be some limits and time limits to make it. It's not like welfare, where you can go on welfare and you can stay on welfare as long as you're hiding, where we want to be accountable for ourselves, but.
So I'm telling you guys nothing new. There's a lot of land probably changing in this area from production agriculture to hunting ranches, or just taking, like Ryan said, people coming in and just getting their little slice of Montana. Does anybody have any thoughts or any comments that you can share about how that's affected your operation? Obviously, it's really increasing land prices, but are there any other stories or effects that you guys have that you could share with us?
So Garrison's not here, but a fella came into Twin Bridges, Dillon area, Glen area, bought some ground. Jim knew the guy that was doing a lot of work on that ground, so on and so forth, kind of set things up. The kid's a rancher. That guy has a lot of wealth, and he's building a golf course out there. Jimmy's got his cows down there, and it took some sweet talking to get those animals down there, but the guy wants more cattle down there because he saw the improvements that it made to his bird hunting. But it's little stories like that and the ability, but it took, somebody from agriculture that was working in realty or in development, so on and so forth. But he runs, it's not all of his cows, but he's got a set of cows that he doesn't winter, and they're down on a place that's going to be a golf course. And Jim asks, he's like, when this is a golf course, do I get to keep grazing my cattle on it? And the answer is no, but you can definitely graze them all the way around. And the guy actually wanted more cattle to put down there. And Jimmy's like, no, this is what the ground will hold. So that was a fella that came in and just kind of by circumstances, it made a big impact for agriculture, but it also helped out a younger producer. Don't tell Jimmy I called him a young producer, please.
Should we move on to labor, Turk?
Yeah, we can always come back later. So let's talk about labor. Clearly a big topic, and what has been discussed is the H-2A program. It seems to have been a solution for some operations. We've also have talked about how to develop a labor force that maybe was never exposed to the farm and ranch life? And are we all okay with that? And so, you know, just on the H2A program, that program's really probably was derived by the row crops in our country. And if you're not familiar with H2A, it would be for seasonal workers. They can only be here for, was it 9.5 months? And then they can't work for you anymore. And so just open that up for discussion. I mean, we can go a lot of different directions with labor, and would love to hear some of your guys' feedback.
I see you guys over there talking. All right, Race.
Well, obviously, we benefit greatly from the H2A program, and I was compiling, you know, we all know that, but as we advertised for our positions on the ranch out there, I think I've had a little over 3,000 applicants for those jobs, only one of them being a domestic worker. So that's to fill 8, you know, seasonal irrigation positions, you know, on both ranches. So interesting, it's, you know, it's a big issue. And, you know, I think those of us that are involved in that program, you know it's a pain at times, but what would we do without it? And so I think that's important. But I really wanted to address my comments more on maybe mentoring. And, you know, because you mentioned a class of people, I think I was looking at my own children a little bit, and I think we can all relate that. You know, sometimes when we grow up on these bigger ranches, our kids get burnt out. Long grueling days, and some of them don't want to come back. And, you know, I think about our crews, and I think of why did my kids want to get on a horse and do some of the grueling days and okay with fencing, and maybe another employee on the same ranch as kids have no desire, you know, and I think we just kind of, sometimes we burn them out. But then I see some of the equine programs and the kids that have come into this area that have no background at all, and how hungry they are for that same position and opportunity to work and come help at a branding or help move portable fencing. And that's, you know, and so we do tap on that, and we do get some advantages from that. But there's a huge amount of liability for the owners of the property. Now, that's not me necessarily, but we spend so much time managing around liability issues that it makes that incredibly hard. And so that might also be, you know, a concern, right? So how, you know, if we got to develop a domestic workforce that is the alternative to an H2A program, how do we do that without, you know, let's be honest, when somebody comes in here totally green, they're not really worth anything, right? You know, they're not any help. So, you know, and yet, boy, if I'm not paying them work comp and going through all this, how am I covered, or is the owner covered? And so those are some issues that, you know, as we talk about mentoring, I look around this room and I see great people with great, you know, desire to help the next generation come in and, you know, and participate and learn. But, you know, it's hard when you got to worry about, hey, what happens if there's an accident? Am I going to lose the place? That's my comment.
This is just of cowboys, and I think that's great, but some of you guys might know Harold Arvik. He run Gerson's in Hysham forever, and Harold called me one spring and he said, I got these kids that want a job. They want to be cowboys. He said they're awful green, but they're starting to rope a little bit, and they're going to be all right. He said, I'm going to have them call you. And so he did, and I told this kid, I said, well, this was years ago. I don't remember the numbers, but of course it wasn't much. To be a cowboy, you gotta want to do it. You're not doing it for the paycheck. And I said, well, this is what it pays. And I said, we'll give you some beef and a place to live. And he said, well, that won't even pay my student loans. So, I mean, he didn't want to be a cowboy, but we can't find any help. I'd like to know where Race is advertising where he gets 300 or 3,000 applicants, because that sounds fantastic. But we used to get, I don't know, we'd get 20 calls every year, and 10 or 15 of them would be good guys that, that we had to turn away because we had a full crew, and we haven't had a full crew for 10 years. I don't know. But just like Ray said, and I guess liability is the thing, but and not to sound arrogant about it, but we don't have the time or inclination to take some guys and show them what to do, because we got stuff we got to get done. But I don't know, go to trade school for a few years and come out a cowboy and give us a call.
Yeah, Coy Holland here, Dillon. I kind of feel like we need to think back to the basics of education. We need to try to get ag back in schools a lot more. When I say that, most normal teachers, I think, in a situation only likes to teach maybe 20 kids in a class. Man, that's one touching 20 kids, if that can happen. So if we can try to get ag influence back into our youth in our communities, because I don't remember where I heard it, but I heard kids in Billings, Montana don't know where milk come from. That's pretty sad. So if we can try to, as a state, or I guess I always think back to when the Pilgrims, because I like to believe, telling your story like Jim said, we're the founding ag producers of America. And I think we're becoming the endangered species of America. And so if we can tell that story good enough, get it influenced in the kids, and get them energized as the youth, maybe we have a better chance in developing a workforce.
Yeah, hello. Kevin Peterson here. Grew up on a commercial cattle ranch, but work at Mountain View Insurance now. And I wanted to expand on what Race was talking about with the work comp and working with Montana State Fund. I think this is something that the Stock Growers Association can actually directly impact as well, because there's some gray area on volunteer help, and the best way to cover them on your farm and ranch work comp policy. With that being said, the correct way to do it is to add the volunteer endorsement onto your ranching policy, but it is incredibly hard to track. So they want you to list individuals by name and when and the number of hours that they work directly at your operation. And as we all know, whether it's branding help or somebody that comes to help for the day, the tracking of that is almost impossible. So what they'll do, if you aren't able to track it, is they'll allow you to put it on your policy for a year, and they're starting to then now remove them during the audit process. The old adage, I think, was if something happens to somebody who's helping out here, I'll give them a $100 bill, and they'll be a cash employee, and maybe they'll pay the claim, right? I think it's a real opportunity for us to work with the state fund to look at that volunteer endorsement, make it easier to track, get it on the policies, and then that way we can reduce some of that liability for volunteer help on the ranch.
Neil Bernosky from Sheridan, and just wanted to talk about the H2A program just a little bit. And we use H2A workers, and they're a real important part for us to get our irrigation done. And I'm sure, like most of you that use these guys, when they're not irrigating, then there's a lot of other duties they can do, and they can make time and get our work done. But so we run into a deal this year in our job description that we we had to repair fence and replace fence. And so it came back that we had to take replace fence out because that would be another $5 an hour. And I guess my point is we need to really make sure that our legislatures realize that that's an important part of agriculture, is being able to get this help. And if they just keep putting more and more burdens on it, is the H2A program going to be just too expensive or unusable or too hard to get these guys across the border? And I think we need to make sure our legislatures know that this is important to us and not ruin the program.
All right, well, we have about 20 minutes left before we wrap up, or probably 15 before we wrap up. And this is the point where we'd like to open it up for kind of all other things that we did not cover. If you have thoughts on any categories outside of those 5 categories, or just ideas or thoughts. We have some ag biz folks. We've heard some from insurance guys. Would love to hear from you guys on any other things that you might interface with your customers on that are challenges. And so with that, we'll kind of open it up for the next couple minutes.
There's been some talk about Jim Hagenbarth from Glenn, BLM permits and Forest Service permits. And as you move those permits around from one family to another, or hopefully eventually maybe a sublease on them, make sure that when you change that permit, say for instance we had a permit that was sheep and we switched it to cattle, but we should have kept sheep on the permit, because if you don't do that, then if you want to go back to sheep, then you have to do another EA and EIS. So that's a really, really important thing that you should consider. And if you can get as many different species on there as you can, with the exception of wildlife, do it.
All right, I promise this is my last comment, but, first of all, I look around the room and know most of you, and we're pretty diverse in that memberships and different organizations and stuff. And so first off, I want to applaud stock growers for doing this. But secondly, I'd like to encourage everybody, whatever group you're affiliated with, keep the ball rolling on this. Let those people know that you care about it and you're going to think about it and make comments. And but finally, I think the one comment, based on most everything we talked about today, having gone through real estate transactions for other owners, right, in the past little bit, you guys know that. One of the things that's real evident is they look at, public land, and they look at our private land, and, it's totally different, the productive value of those places. And most of the reason that we're more productive on our private land is we have more flexibility to manage that better. And I think as we start talking about regulation, I'm a little hesitant for wanting more regulation, even because, I think it seems like as we do that, you use the idea about COVID money, right? And we look at that program, it's a great idea to have some people have some money available to do some things, but it didn't end up in the right hands in a lot of cases, right? And I think that's the problem with a lot of these programs, is that we draw lines so rigid that they don't end up working great for most people. And so how do we, as we go about this process, how can we maintain enough flexibility into these programs so that they truly do work on the ground? Because none of us are cooked. There's not an average precip year ever, and all this applies, each one of these users. And so I think that's a big challenge for us, is how to make these rules and applications of these programs, if they work for more people. And I think it's through a little bit more flexibility. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yes, thanks for joining us, and thanks for your service. Brett, hey, Turk, Brett.
I have one last parting comment. Brian Massard again from Dillon. Again, I've been involved with the stock growers for over 30 years. Had my first bull sale out here in 1991, 33 years ago. And half of our buyers that year had 100 cows or less. And 100% of those people are gone today. And I got involved in the conversation of why that happened. I got involved with stock growers for 30 years trying to figure that out. And all we could talk about was whether or not to sue the packers. That would seem to be our only discussion, or government regulations, or everything that is on the list tonight is huge, and those are all very important. But what I've learned, our family has learned in the last 3 years, everything we're talking about now is just a symptom of a major problem, and that is the dietary guidelines. If you look at what our beef consumption was in the 60s, it was 100 pounds per capita. And we dipped at our lowest point here, I think 22 years ago, we were down to 17 pounds, and we fought our way back up. But we have learned that people are afraid to eat meat. People still think beef is dangerous. People still think there are real health issues. And not one time in one country, in one study since the beginning of time, has it ever been proven that saturated fat in beef has ever caused heart disease, or cancer, or diabetes, or obesity, or any other autoimmune disease. Yet there are dozens of studies that prove that saturated fat and red meat improve all of those conditions. And yet the same USDA who we're looking for our next handout from, who we're looking for the improvement of our next program, will not allow that to be published. And so we all question in the last 30 years, the beef checkoff is another one. We've been fighting over the beef checkoff, whether or not it does a good job for the last 30 years. The beef checkoff cannot advertise saturated fat because the USDA will not allow it. And until we get that changed, people are still going to be afraid of eating meat. I just know right now, I learned all this information from a vegetarian, of all places. A gal that was sick for 25 years, could not get better, was assigned to trans fats, and finally learned that in 1959 there was a fraudulent study that was done by a professor at the University of Minnesota that said saturated fat caused heart disease. It was just a hypothesis. Took it to the USDA, took it to the American Heart Association, Procter & Gamble got on board, and that was the end of it. And that's been the science. That has been the science since 1959. And since 1980, when you look at where they limit saturated fat at 10% of your daily intake, and they do not want people eating red meat until we get that changed in our dietary guidelines, until we get the sugar companies and these huge seed oil companies from being the biggest donors to the USDA and the dietary guidelines, none of anything else we talked about tonight matters. How many people know in 2021 that the USDA, who we're looking for our next program from, gave Tufts University $10 million to begin developing lab-grown meat? Now, if that doesn't tell you, in the name of climate change, if that doesn't tell you where the USDA is going, who we're counting on for the LRP programs and the crop insurance and the rain insurance, that's our program who's supposed to be watching out for agriculture. And so those things have to be changed. It has to be changed at the USDA, the dietary guidelines. There is a deadline in January. All of the people on the current committee for the 2025 dietary guidelines are supposed to disclose any conflicts of interest. So far, they have refused to disclose their conflicts of interest, and right now there is 152 conflicts of interest with the people on the panel for the U.S. dietary guidelines. Very heavily connected to plant-based, very heavily connected to alternative meat. That has got to be changed. So we have to get rid of the 10% limit on saturated fat, and we have to force those people to disclose their conflicts of interest. And if we don't do that, we're pretty good at agriculture. What I've watched for 30 years is when the public tells us to go do something, we go and do it, and we don't even defend ourselves. There's nothing wrong with what we're doing, but we're not very educated on that, and I myself just am learning about it now. But I would say the dietary guidelines trumps everything that we talked about tonight. And if we do not fix that, the rest of the stuff we talked about, we're still gonna be having these meetings. And I wanna thank the stock growers. They always have an open door. They always invite everybody to the table. But if we don't fix that, we're not gonna fix any of this stuff. The writing's on the wall. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Ben Reed. I think what Mr. Massard's saying is pretty prevalent now. Everyone hates the hippies that moved into Bozeman and ruined their college town, but I think there's some movement, some of those people that move in, and I've seen it before. I was in near Seattle a few years ago, and I asked some people there, I said, "You're not one of those weird vegans, are you?" And they said, "No, around here they're more interested in what was the cow's name, what's its lifestyle," which isn't really a benefit either. But there's a lot of people who are out there listening to the podcasts, or they're on the internet, and they're seeing that some producers are communicating with them about the nutritive value of the food, and they can command a higher price by doing that. There's also a store near Bozeman that I just looked at their website, and it's all grown in Montana. Everything you can get: candles, meat, tallow soap, whatever you want. They're selling whole chickens for $30, and you can get a chicken at Safeway for $7. And is the beef industry taking advantage of this? Are young producers taking advantage of these opportunities to, grow their own market and connect with the consumer? And if more operations did that, would they not have so many issues with their profitability and their ability to afford labor, or, their access to buying the neighbor's place? If they're making more money and they pencil a little better, can they get better financing and purchase a place and understand that they're not just purchasing an ag property anymore? You're buying conservation, recreation. That's why this ground costs so much. And does the ag community kind of need to embrace some of those people that come in from out of state and exploit them, for lack of a better term? Because people don't know where milk comes from, and they don't even know how much it should cost, and it should probably all cost more. So
Good job. Good job. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, for those of you who may be driving home tonight and think of a few ideas, or maybe just didn't want to stand up and speak in front of folks, we have put together on our website, mtbeef.org, a online form that you can go and fill out and submit additional ideas or thoughts. So as the days or weeks or months pass, if you have additional thoughts or ideas, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to submit through there, or just contact our office, and one of our staff members will take down your notes and your thoughts. So before we wrap it up, we are going to do a couple more questions, so grab your phones. We have a few more questions for you guys to round out the evening, and then we will head to the lobby area. I think there's a lot of food still available for people to grab snacks. So we've talked about those 5 areas throughout the night: tax, barriers to entry, government programs. Of those 5 areas presented, we would like you to rank those from most important to least important, with 1 being the most important. Oh, you might have to log in if you closed out your window. So you can just scan that QR code again. All right, I'm not seeing any results yet. Everybody good? Anybody need help? Has people submitted theirs? It's not popping up. Can you refresh that, Ellie? There we go. Perfect. And I think I think it's just a drag and drop, so you should be able to just to slide those up. What was that? What's leading? Minimizing barriers to entry for young producers is currently 1. 2, improving tax climate. 3, improving government programs. 4, industry mentorship. And 5, labor challenges. All right. I see a couple more people finishing up.
I have just a comment here while we're waiting, but I know we have a lot of young producers in here, and so we really want to hear your thoughts. And so if it'd be more comfortable to submit thoughts online or even just call us direct. You can get my cell phone because we really want to hear from you. And we really want to get the dialogue going on what are you facing? Like if there would be any level of leg up, what would that be? And we really want to know.
All right. Next question. What topics from tonight's discussion did you find the most valuable? Seeing lots of taxes. All right. Last few answers. All right. And we will click it to next one. And our final question is, how can MSGA and the Producer Profitability Initiative serve you and your family's operations? All right, well, as we wrap that up, you guys have a few more seconds that you can submit that. I'm going to ask Ian to kind of head towards Turk. And as part of all of our listening sessions, we have partnered with Western Ranch Supply and Boehringer Ingelheim to donate a vaccine cooler for all of our participants that attend meetings. So when you walked in, you filled out a form and hopefully dropped it in the cooler, and we'll do a little drawing and draw the winner for tonight.
You want to do that now? Has everybody got entered? Or would like to enter still? Okay, we're going to enter up here. Rachel Potter.
All right. Congratulations,
thank you.
Rachel. Before you leave tonight with it, we would like to take a photo with you and your prize. So.
So just some closing thoughts. I mean, this is just an ongoing discussion, right? I mean, this is actually only the beginning. And so we can't thank you enough for just taking the time to spend with us, for us to capture the discussion and the passion that we all have to make this a very strong industry and to keep Montana, Montana. There's some big topics that came up tonight that for sure Montana Stock Growers takes very, very serious. And so please make sure that if we're not doing something that you think we need to be doing, that's why we have board members across the state. Talk to them. Call the office and say, hey, maybe you didn't know this. You need to know this information. We are going to Glasgow later this week. If you have other neighbors or you go to the website and see our schedule. If you know other ranchers in that area, please say, hey, you really need to go to this because we really want to hear from everybody. And this is really the time not to be bashful and not to be quiet because we believe this is very important. And so, John, do you have any other comments or anything? Rayleigh?
Just let's give Barry and his team one more round of applause and thanks for hosting and providing food and drinks tonight. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Anyway, thank you all for coming. Hey, you did good.